Cassidy, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Obviously, Imagine Communications, when it comes to IP, you guys are at the center of a lot of the taking advantage of, especially 2110, of that technology and kind of putting it to good use. You guys have been on the blazing the trail, if you will, on virtualized hardware and stuff for a few years now. So what's it like when the world finally catches up to you guys?
Wow, well, that hasn't quite happened yet, but but I will say too, it's not just the 2110. It's every one of these systems seems to have a mix of SDI and 2110, or maybe even some compressed workflows. So yeah, we're right in the middle of these 2110 systems, but we're also in some cases even using 2110 just to kind of augment an existing SDI or compressed system. So it's we're part of that best of breed, even across formats, if you will.
Right. So what are some of the big messaging for you guys this spring? Obviously, the NAB show is going virtual, I guess, in 2 weeks. What's sort of the messaging around those efforts and what you have going on?
Well, one of the things that's cool is as technology has moved along, it's easier and easier to do things remotely, right? So like remote production is more and more a norm for the world. But for example, for NAB, we're able to access systems and do live demonstrations of workflows and functionalities. So for us, NAB is different, but we're still kind of doing an NAB. I still barely get away from this camera or this microphone this last week.
Right. So as far as when you went to your booth, it wasn't increasingly, like you said, virtualized. There was a lot of software, so you can obviously demonstrate a lot of that stuff without having to have a booth per se. What are some of the hot new features or technology advancements that you have?
Yeah. The big one is from the beginning of these IP systems, when we realized how many different flows or streams or video signals we could put on a piece of fiber, the question I was asked by a lot of broadcast engineers was, how do I know what is on the wire? Because I can't just call it out on a detailed drawing and say this is camera 1 and know that it's always going to be camera 1. Right. You may have 32 HD signals like at Texas A&M, where they're using our Selenio Network Processor to interconnect their venues. They have 2 strands of fiber, and they're actually doing 32 HD signals in each direction. So we used to have to do 1 SDI signal over that strand of fiber. So what we have now is a feature called Path View, where it is a live, dynamically updating detail drawing of the system. So I could say, show me everywhere that camera 1 is routed before I take that camera out of the workflow, for example. Say I need to do a repair, or I'm just going to change that device out. I want to know who I'm affecting. So I can actually punch that in on my web browser and see a live drawing of the entire workflow involving camera 1. And if I change a route, it's going to update immediately to show me that. So, you don't necessarily have a piece of paper that is your primary reference anymore. You have to have a dynamic reference.
Right. That's automated, right? So I'm not having to take my drawing and then scan it in or anything. It's automatically reflected.
And have an oversized printer and get out the highlighter.
Right, exactly. So is that what you see? It's one, the big challenge, I think, from my just looking at all these systems and technologies. They're all very complicated from the outside looking in. Everyone's promising, a lot as far as the system's capabilities, and it's kind of difficult to get into the weeds and kind of really understand the technologies. So when people come to you, what do you see as some of their challenges in terms of understanding how they should approach, finding the right vendor and finding the right fit, and then where you guys kind of fit in to offer them a really valuable solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I'll say is it's new, but it's not, IP technology is not overly complex. It's not, for example, as complex as analog or RF. So a lot of people who've been in this industry for years really kind of need to step back just to multiplication tables to understand how the IP stuff works. It's easier. Right. But that said, part of what we've done with PathView and with all of our new products, like the user interface for the Selenio Network Processor, is try to present information that is valuable both to the IT staff and the broadcast staff in a way that they can both parse it, right? It's not just a black screen with BIOS text on it. There's actually a way of laying it out that makes it clear based on if I'm in that operational position and I'm having some sort of an effect to a network. Okay, my video is being affected, maybe, worst case scenario, and I need to troubleshoot this quickly. So I need to see it in a way that is relevant to a broadcast engineer. So that's part of what we try to do.
Right. Are you finding that because again, 3 years ago, the challenge that you all had was there weren't a lot of IP engineers, and the broadcast engineers didn't really understand the IP technologies. So what's your sense as far as their understanding within these facilities of being comfortable with the concepts you're talking about?
You know, the broadcast engineers and the broadcast operations staff have really come up, and production staff have really come up to speed very quickly. I think once they get their feet wet and they realize that it's not quite as complex as some of the previous technologies, they actually get excited about it. In particular at Texas A&M, where they have younger staff and student staff that's already sort of been dealing with this IT technology before they even got into production. That's just a seamless transition. But even for engineers who've been in the business for years, I've seen them step up and grab this pretty quickly. And then on the other side, some of the IT staff at, say, a broadcast facility or a college, they get intrigued now that the technology is something they can relate to a little more, that's involved with their production workflow, and they're stepping in. So it's actually that human convergence is happening pretty smoothly, I think.
That's good. We're getting over the animosity, if you will.
Yeah, I think I got lucky. When I came in 2017 and started working on our first round ball arena, as we would say, it was definitely a bleeding edge, scary thing for a lot of the people involved. But we deployed on time, and the system has been in operation now for 2 seasons, and there haven't been any issues with the 2110 IP technology itself. So since then, since probably 2019, the beginning of 2019, I haven't really felt animosity towards the IP systems. It's more a matter of the same thing we dealt with in the SDI world, right? Every one of these is a little bit different. Every show is a little bit different. So best of breed is not necessarily universal from one system to the next either. It's always just based on what effect you're trying to have. So, for example, we have a multiviewer now in the Selenio Network Processor, and it's a one-frame in-to-out low-latency multiviewer that works for UHD, HD, has HDR, 2110, and SDI. Why did we do all these things? Because every single time that thing gets placed in a system, it's going to have different responsibilities. It's going to have to deal with HDR sometimes, or it's going to have to take a HDR signal down to an SDR, or you'll have a mix of IP and SDI inputs. Really, it's kind of, there's so many features that people are demanding from one event to the next, not just from one system to the next, because you have event arenas where you have a concert one night, you have the sporting event the next day, and then you could have a totally different sporting event with a different arrangement of cameras and everything on the following day. So that flexibility is huge right now, and that's really what we've been wrestling with, and it's been good. That's what keeps us engaged, and we enjoy it, and that's what we're here to do, solve these problems. Sure.
So last question, one of the sad things about, there's a lot of reasons why not having NAB this year is sad. Least of all, it's caused the reason why we're not having NAB. But, you would have had an opportunity with Grass Valley, Sony, a lot of companies that were traditional hardware are all of a sudden in this virtualized space and riding alongside of you and kind of able to having things that can tie into your systems, and you can have a really awesome, amazing message on an industry-wide basis. So since we aren't there, can you kind of make that point? I mean, is that true? Do you think the fact that this would have been a virtualized show as far as the acceptance and the efforts behind traditional hardware manufacturers would have really kind of stepped up everything?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have several systems where the technology that we're talking about, this 2110 IP, in some cases even bridging into SDI or interconnecting SDI facilities by 2110, the way Texas A&M does, has allowed remote production, right? So again, I think it just drives home what we're saying here, that we're having a virtual NAB. We're having a virtual discussion about this. People can virtually produce a lot of the same events. So when we do kind of figure out how to move forward and have some of these sporting events, live events of any kind, the way we produce them is so much more flexible now than it ever was before. And we can do home production or remote production more and more all the time. And, in whether it's an SDI camera from one of those other companies or an IP camera from one of those other companies, what I can say about, for example, my router control system, SDNO, Magellan SDNO, is that I'm going to be able to speak to those devices in most cases. Every integration we've ever supported over the history of the company, going back to Leach, we still support. And that's really been key because, again, now you're adding this other degree of separation, right, with this pandemic, that I might just not be able to have the same physical arrangement that I had before last year. Right. So now I really do have to just use one of the other aspects of this technology that may have already been there. I just didn't have something forcing me to step in that direction.
Sure, yeah.
I see it. I see that heating up no matter how this all plays out. I think we're going to see more and more remote production. And we're already kind of on that path, right? It just accelerates it.
Right. Great. Well, thanks, Cassie, for your time. Really appreciate it. Great insights. And hopefully we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you, Ken.